I never imagined my daughter's first real memory of her extended family would involve violence. Not a hug. Not a shared story. A slap. Before I tell you how I turned my brother's life into a living hell, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe no child deserves to be hurt, especially by family. They always said, family comes first. But no one ever told me what to do when family becomes the thing you have to protect your child from. I was still gripping the steering wheel when Sadie leaned forward, pointing excitedly. Is that it, Mama? The big house with the flag. Her voice had that mix of awe and bounce. 6 years old and endlessly curious. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yep. That's Grandpa and Grandma's lake house. Torch Lake shimmered beyond the trees, catching the golden swell of late afternoon. The gravel crunched under our tires as I pulled up to the 3-story wood house. Paint flaking, but still standing proud. White balloons fluttered from the deck railing. A plastic sign hung from the porch read, Ellison Legacy Weekend, a time to remember. A time to celebrate. I parked next to Brent's Range Rover. Of course he was already here. Probably arrived yesterday to make sure everything looked perfect, just like him. Sadie unbuckled and bounced out, humming a tune from the radio. She twirled once in the driveway, bare feet landing in patches of clover and dust. Smells like a lake, she said. And firewood, it did. And something else, something colder. A feeling in my stomach I hadn't named yet. Come on, I said, opening the trunk. Let's get the bags inside. We didn't even make it to the porch before the door opened and Elaine came rushing out. Sadie, she cried, arms wide. My mother smelled like hairspray and Pinot Grigio. She enveloped Sadie in a hug that was all show, the kind you pose for in a photo. Behind her, Brent descended the steps in his navy polo and boat shoes, grinning like a campaign ad. Well, look who finally made the trip, he said, eyes going straight to my car. Didn't know they still made those. I let the comment pass. Howard appeared in the doorway, one hand in his khaki pocket, the other swirling ice in a glass of something amber. Didn't expect to see you, Harper, he said. Thought maybe you found a reason to bail again. He chuckled at his own jab. There's always a spot in the mailroom if things ever get too tough. I kept smiling. I'd promised myself. No arguments. Not this trip. Sadie skipped up the porch steps with Elaine, chatting about school and music and her stuffed raccoon named Mobble. I followed, dragging the suitcase behind me. Natalie gave me a small wave from inside the living room. Brent's wife. Kind, but cautious. Always looked like she was waiting for permission to speak. And then there was Paul. Uncle Paul wasn't blood. He'd married my dad's sister years ago. Now he stood near the bay windows, adjusting something on a tripod. New documentary project? I asked. He looked up startled. Oh, yeah, family history. Thought I'd record some interviews, ambient shots, you know. Elaine's idea. Of course it was, I said under my breath. He smiled like he hadn't heard. Or maybe he had. Paul had always been the quiet observer, the one who noticed more than he said. As I carried Sadie's overnight bag upstairs, I passed the old hallway mirror. My reflection stared back, older than I remembered, tired, but determined. Legacy weekend. Right. I wasn't here for them. I was here for her. The guest room still had the same pale blue wallpaper with faded sailboats, like a time capsule that refused to move forward. I laid Sadie's things on the bed. She immediately pulled out her sketch pad and started drawing the lake from memory. She always drew water first. Blue swirls, waves with faces, sometimes little boats with animals on board. That was her world. Safer, sweeter. Downstairs I heard clinking glasses. Brent's voice carried through the floorboards like it always had. Too loud, too self-assured. I stayed upstairs longer than necessary. Unpacking slowly. Refolding shirts that didn't need refolding. Eventually, I joined the others on the deck. Everyone was clustered around a long table of finger foods. Charcuterie boards, deviled eggs, fancy lemonade in mason jars with mint leaves. Elaine had gone full Pinterest, and the smell of grilled corn and lemon rosemary chicken floated from the patio grill. Sadie was sitting on Natalie's lap, humming a song while stacking crackers. Howard had started a toast. "Here's to family," he said. "To the Ellison name. To doing something in this world worth being remembered for." Everyone clapped. Brent added, "And to the newest award. Executive Mentor of the Year, 5th year running." More clapping, louder this time. I sipped water from a red Solo cup. Sadie looked over at me and winked. She was the only reason I didn't leave right then. I sat next to Paul, who was fiddling with a wireless mic clipped to the railing. "Capturing the magic?" I asked. "Dry," he chuckled. "Trying to. Elaine's big on this whole legacy montage thing. Wants every story on record." "Whose stories?" I asked, not really needing an answer. He nodded toward Brent. "You know how it is?" "Yeah, I did." Elaine appeared beside me with a glass of rosé and that polished smile she reserved for social occasions. "You look good, Harper." "Thin." I nodded. "Thanks, I've been working." "Still at that nonprofit place? Or was it a charter school? Community literacy program?" I said, keeping my tone even. "Still going." "Oh, how sweet," she said, turning before I could answer. That was always Elaine. Compliments with a hook, small talk that cuts if you listen close enough. "Harper?" Brent called from across the deck. "This your old Subaru outside?" I looked up. "Still kicking, huh? You ever think about upgrading?" "Not everyone needs 3 vehicles," I said. He laughed. Touche. I hated that word from his mouth, like everything was a game. A punchline. I stood and made my way toward the dock, needing air. The lake glistened under the sunset. Warm, still, too calm for what I was feeling. Sadie followed, her sketchpad tucked under her arm. She knelt by the edge, dangling her fingers in the water, humming softly. "You okay, baby?" I asked. She nodded. "I like it here. It's quiet. The water sounds like a song." I smiled. "You always hear music in things." She shrugged. "Music's everywhere if you're listening." I sat beside her, watching the water ripple around her small fingers. My body tensed when I heard footsteps behind us. Brent. He crouched beside Sadie and smiled. "Wow, you're loud for such a small thing," he said. I froze. Sadie blinked up at him, uncertain. Then came Elaine's voice from behind. "Just like her mom used to be. Before we taught her better." Sadie glanced at me. I put my hand gently on her shoulder. That's when I knew. I wasn't here to keep the peace. I was here to protect her from their idea of it. I walked Sadie back toward the house slowly, my hand resting on her back. Her humming had stopped. She kept glancing back at the lake, where Brent still crouched like nothing had happened, like his words were just air, not arrows. The sky had turned a deep amber. Wind rustled the birch trees lining the dock. Inside, the party noise was rising again. Laughter, wine pouring, someone playing an old Springsteen song from the Bluetooth speaker. I guided Sadie upstairs and helped her change into pajamas. She picked her favorite, light blue with little owls. Then crawled under the blanket and whispered, "I like the stars here." I kissed her forehead. "Try to hold on to the good parts, okay?" She nodded. But I wasn't sure she understood. I lingered in the doorway. Watched her close her eyes. Then stood alone in the hallway, heart aching, jaw clenched. The sound of Howard's voice floated up from below. Something about Brent's vision for the family foundation. The applause was louder than before. That's when it really hit me. They weren't just pretending the past didn't happen. They were rewriting it. They were making Brent into something noble. Something worth celebrating. And they expected me to play along. I walked down the back staircase, slipped out onto the porch, and let the screen door shut quietly behind me. The lake was dark now. Quiet again. Only the hum of cicadas and the distant pop of someone's firework across the water. I watched Sadie's little shoes on the grass where she had been dancing earlier. Barefoot. Spinning, laughing. And I thought, I should have turned the car around the moment we got here. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Tomorrow the legacy brunch was scheduled, another round of speeches. Another shrine to the one person they'd always chosen over me. But not this time. This time, I wasn't just here to survive it. Have you ever stayed silent? Just to keep the peace? Would you have turned back or stayed like I did? Tell me in the comments. I'm reading. If you've ever been the one who talks too much, laughs too loud, or just takes up too much space, you're not alone. Leave a comment if you ever got told you were too much. Sadie's about to find out what that really means. It was just a song from a cartoon about friendship. The kind with dancing animals, bright colors, and a chorus that stuck in your head for days. But Sadie sang it like it meant something more. Her little voice floated through the lakehouse's vaulted ceiling, bouncing gently off the knotty pine beams, and mingling with the clinking of mimosa glasses. I'd heard her humming it in the car yesterday. Now she sat cross-legged at the kids' table by the bay window, coloring a fox in a tiara and swaying side to side while she sang. It was early, maybe 900. Sunlight poured through the east windows, turning the oak floor golden beneath her. The adults were gathered around the long farmhouse table, chattering about real estate trends, wellness retreats, and who might give the next toast. I poured myself coffee from the big silver carafe and tried to stay invisible. Brent slouched near the head of the table, rubbing his eyes with one hand and checking his phone with the other. Hungover. Probably regretting the fourth glass of scotch from last night. Elaine sat beside him, hair freshly curled, pearls perfectly placed. She passed around a platter of croissants like it was a boardroom, not a breakfast. Howard read the Wall Street Journal on an iPad the size of a dinner plate. Nobody really looked at Sadie. Except Paul. He hovered with his camera again, capturing the family vibe. I saw him zoom in slowly as Sadie reached for a crayon and sang the second verse. She's just excited. I'd told Elaine the night before, after Sadie had squealed at the fireworks. Elaine had smiled with that tight, controlled smile and said, "That kind of energy needs taming." Now, that same energy filled the room like sunlight. And the cousins, 3 of them, preteen and too cool, rolled their eyes. One of them, Noah, made a face behind her back. Another mimed plugging her ears. Sadie kept singing, unbothered. The chorus came, and she sang it louder. Shoulders lifted, voice stretching with pride. "We can always find the way, if we sing it out together." That's when Brent's jaw clenched. His fork scraped hard against his plate. He glanced at Elaine, who didn't look at him. Then he looked at me. Then she leaned in, barely moving her lips. "You should tell her to keep it down." I blinked. Elaine was still smiling, as if the suggestion were a compliment, a gift, a warning. I walked toward Sadie slowly. "Hey, sweet pea," I said, kneeling beside her. "Maybe let the other kids finish their breakfast." Sadie smiled at me. Wide, proud. Her hair was still damp from her morning shower. She smelled like apple shampoo and syrup. "Okay, Mommy," she whispered. Then, she sang the last line again. Even louder this time. Her little voice rang through the beams. That's when Brent stood up. Hard. His chair scraped against the floor, loud and sharp. I turned to look, but one of my aunts, Anne I think, touched my arm. She was mid-sentence about her retirement trip. Something about hiking Sedona. It delayed me by maybe 2 seconds. By the time I turned back, Brent was already halfway across the room. His steps were silent on the wood. Sadie didn't notice. She was humming again. Still coloring. Still smiling. I opened my mouth. But then it happened. The moment she hit the chorus, Sadie lifted her little voice like the room was a concert hall. It echoed across the beams of the high ceiling, bouncing off the wide windows behind the kids' table. She wasn't yelling. Just full of joy. The kind of unfiltered joy you don't know how to fake, or silence, at 6 years old. She tapped her crayon like a beat. So many colors in the sky. The cousins glanced at each other, smirking. One of them, Emily, I think, rolled her eyes and muttered to her brother. Someone forgot their indoor voice. The boy snickered and leaned away from Sadie, like she had just done something contagious. Brent's fork scraped loudly against his plate, then stilled. Elaine leaned in from the side, her perfume soft but sharp. "You should tell her to keep it down," she said through the corner of her smile. I tried. I really did. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, turning halfway in my chair. "Maybe let the other kids." Sadie was already halfway through the second verse. Her crayons scattered as she stood up to gesture with her hands, like a music teacher. "She doesn't even know they're laughing at her," Natalie whispered gently across the table. I heard it. And it stung because it was true. Just then, Aunt Celia leaned toward me. "So, Harper, whatever happened with that grant proposal you were working on years ago? Was that for renewable energy or something?" It was like she'd pulled the emergency brake on my focus. I turned to answer, reflexively polite, even as I kept one eye on Sadie. She was twirling again, this time with a little skip, and then, a chair scraped back. Brent stood, fast, and in 2 strides he was across the floor, toward her. "Brent," I called. Too late. He was already there, standing in front of Sadie like a wall. She looked up at him, still holding her crayon, still smiling. "Do you have any idea how loud you're being?" he said, voice low but razor sharp. She blinked, confused. "I was just singing." The slap came before the word singing could finish. A hard, open-handed crack across her left cheek. Her crayon dropped, her smile vanished, and the room went silent. You could hear a single mimosa bubble pop. Sadie didn't scream, she just froze. Her little hand hovered near her face, like even her body wasn't sure what had happened. I stood up so fast I knocked my chair into the wall. Elaine sipped her drink. Howard muttered, "She needed that." Natalie dropped her fork. Paul's camera light blinked red. The cousins stared. No one moved. Except me. I crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside Sadie. Her eyes were glassy but dry. She turned her face toward me slowly. "Was I bad, Mommy?" I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't say a word. But something inside me split down the middle. A clean, irreversible fracture. And I knew that the promise I made to myself, the one about not starting anything, just died in that room. I didn't look at Brent. I only looked at her. And in that moment I chose a different kind of legacy. Not theirs. Mine. Some people call that discipline. Others call it abuse. Which one do you see? Let me know where you stand. That was the last morning I trusted silence to protect anyone. Sadie hadn't spoken since the slap. Not a word during breakfast. Not when we packed her favorite pajamas. Not even when she brushed her tiny fingers across the window of the guest room, fogging the glass with one shaky breath. I didn't cry. Not while folding our things. Not even when Elaine tapped on the door, pretending everything was fine. "There's fruit salad in the fridge if you want something for the road." She didn't say sorry. Didn't ask how Sadie was. Didn't even ask if we were okay. She just walked away, like we were an inconvenience leaving early. In my head, I replayed Sadie's question from the morning before. "Was I bad, Mommy?" I'd answered with a hug and a kiss on her forehead. But that wasn't enough. Not anymore. I zipped the last suitcase, slid it off the bed, and looked around. The lake house hadn't changed. Still smelled like cedar and wine and old ambition. But I had changed. "Ready, sweetheart?" I asked softly. Sadie nodded. Still no words. As I opened the front door, sunlight spilled into the hallway. The family was out on the dock again, laughing, like yesterday hadn't happened. Only Paul stood near the driveway, adjusting a shoulder strap on his old brown camera bag. I almost walked right past him, but he stepped forward. "Hey," he said gently. "Just a second." I paused, holding Sadie's hand tighter. She leaned into me. Paul pulled a small USB from his pocket and placed it in my palm. "It's all there," he said, voice low. "Audio's clean." I didn't mean to record it, but I never shut the mics off after breakfast started. I stared at the USB, then at him. "You okay giving this to me?" I asked. Paul's jaw twitched. "I was a kid once too, Harper." That was all he said. That was all I needed. I nodded, squeezed his hand briefly, and walked away with Sadie. The gravel crunched under our shoes. With every step, my spine straightened a little more. I didn't look back. Not once. The Subaru's engine hummed steady as we pulled onto the main road. Sadie curled up in the back seat, arms tucked beneath her legs like she could make herself smaller. Her cheek, where Brent had struck her, looked pale now. No visible bruise, but I saw it anyway. Every time I glanced in the mirror, her eyes were closed, but I knew she wasn't asleep. Not really. Just somewhere else. The kind of place I used to go when my father's words got sharp or my mother's smiles turned tight. As a little girl, I once said "Ach" too loudly when Dad yanked my arm. I thought it would make him stop. It didn't. It just made the room go colder, more dangerous, not gentler. So I learned, quiet meant survival, silence meant safety. At least, that's what they told us. But Sadie wasn't going to learn that from me. Not anymore. I drove through gray Michigan backroads, past signs for antique malls and cherry stands. My phone buzzed once. Then twice. Elaine. Don't make this bigger than it is. He didn't mean it. Think about how this affects everyone. Everyone, meaning Brent. His career. His image. The family name. Not the child in the back seat. Not the one who hadn't spoken in hours. I tossed the phone into the center console and turned up the fan. When we pulled into Ann Arbor, the air felt different. Cooler. Like the weight of Torch Lake had stayed behind, hovering over the dock like a bad dream. Tara's apartment was on the second floor of a brick building, covered in ivy. Before I even knocked, the door swung open. She didn't ask questions. Didn't offer tea or say, "It's going to be okay." She just opened her arms, and Sadie walked straight into them. Tara held her, tight, gentle, knowing. And I stood in the doorway for a moment, exhaling the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding for 3 years. Then I stepped inside. That night, after Sadie fell asleep in Tara's bed with her favorite blanket from the car, I sat on the couch with my laptop open and the USB drive in my hand. Tara had poured us tea. Neither of us touched it. We listened together. Brent's voice, loud, irritated. Sadie's soft humming. The sudden crack of the slap. And then, Howard's voice. She needed that. Elaine's laugh, light like ice. Tara didn't say anything. She just closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deep. I hadn't realized I was trembling until I pressed both palms against the edge of the table. "I'm not going to scream," I said. My voice surprised me. Steady, low. Tara nodded. "You don't have to?" I opened my email. "To the Ethics Board of Meridian Financial," I began. The words poured out, calm and surgical. What happened? Where it happened? Who was there? The audio file attached. I didn't ask them to punish Brent. I just told the truth. Clearly, cleanly, like a mirror no one could turn away from. When I hit send, I didn't flinch. A few minutes later, my phone lit up. Brent Ellison calling. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Then I powered the phone off. Some storms are better watched from silence. If someone hurt your child, and you had proof, would you expose them? Or protect the family name? Tell me what you would do. I'm listening. If you've ever been told to, just let it go. For the sake of appearances. Tell me in the comments how long you held your truth in, because I'm done holding mine. They said I'd ruin the family name. But my daughter's face meant more to me than any legacy. My coffee had gone cold. The laptop fan hummed against the silence of my apartment, a low white noise I barely registered anymore. It had been a week since I sent the audio. 5 days since Brent called and I didn't pick up. 3 days since Natalie left a message asking what was going on. I hadn't answered her either. The Zoom waiting room blinked once. Then again. "Tara," I whispered. "They're logging on." She nodded, sitting just outside the frame, arms crossed, notepad ready. Not as my lawyer, not officially. But she knew the law better than most, and she knew me. 4 faces appeared on screen. No smiles, no greetings, just nods. "Ms. Ellison, you may begin when ready." I inhaled, slow, precise. "Thank you. I'm here to present evidence related to Brent Ellison, senior leadership at Meridian Financial." I clicked. Share screen. The waveform of Paul's audio filled the window. I didn't start with the slap. I started with the culture. How Brent was praised for firm leadership. How his father, Howard, once said, "A little fear builds respect." How Sadie had always been treated like a performance to critique, not a person to love. Then I played the audio. No one blinked. Not even at the sound of Sadie's gasp. I gave them timestamps, names, context. Then I stopped talking. Let the silence speak. The panel chair, a woman with silver hair and a scar on her chin, finally spoke. "We'll review this and be in touch within 7 business days." I thanked them and left the call. Tara didn't speak for a full minute. Then she exhaled. "You did it," she said. But I didn't feel finished. I wasn't just reporting what happened. I was reclaiming what had always been stolen in silence. Tara slid her laptop closer. "We should document everything from this point forward," she said. "Not just for Meridian. For custody too. If this escalates." I nodded. We pulled up state guidelines for child endangerment and abuse reporting, then federal whistleblower protections, and then a spreadsheet. I never thought I'd track trauma like expense reports, but here we were. Timestamps. Direct quotes. Witnesses. Paul had sent a follow-up email that morning. All recordings backed up. Clear audio. Matching dates. He even offered to testify, quietly, if needed. There was something comforting about Paul's consistency. He didn't say, "I'm so sorry." He just did the work. And for now, that was enough. I was halfway through drafting a letter to Meridian's legal team when my phone vibrated again. Natalie voicemail, 1min 42 sec. I hesitated. Then pressed play. "Hey Harper, it's me. I don't really know what's going on, but Brent said Sadie was acting out. That she screamed or something." A pause. A sigh. "I know she's just a kid, but is everything okay?" I let the message end without replaying it. Did she know? Did she suspect? Or was she just doing what we were all taught to do? Soften the story so it doesn't ruin the room. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I saved the voicemail, made a note in the file. Then I turned back to the laptop, opened a new document, and typed, "Draft. Statement for press. Should Meridian delay response?" Because I had learned one thing for certain. Silence was a strategy, and I wasn't gonna let them own it anymore. That afternoon, the email came in from Meridian. No dramatic subject line. Just 3 cold lines. "Brent Ellison is hereby suspended pending formal review. His company profile has been removed from all public-facing platforms. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." I sat up. No smile, no tears. I just wrote 1 line in my notebook. Step 1 teen complete. Tara looked over. "Do you want to draft something for Natalie now?" I shook my head. "She's not the one I'm dealing with." Not 2 minutes later, my phone lit up. No photo, just a name, Elaine. "Mom," I answered. Didn't say a word. She didn't either, not at first. Then came the familiar blade, sugar-coated and venom-laced. "You've always been jealous. But you've gone too far this time." I didn't respond. I just ended the call. And deleted the number. Blood might be thicker than water. But truth doesn't dilute in either. Would you choose the truth, even if your whole family called you a traitor? Comment yes if you'd still speak up. Some betrayals leave bruises. Others just look like applause. The footage didn't explode. It leaked. A 39-second clip. No context. No headline. Just Brent's voice, then the slap. Then the silence. At first, it was a whisper on parenting forums. Then came the threads. Is this discipline or abuse? Who lets this happen in a house full of adults? By the time it hit the parenting subreddit and local news in Ann Arbor, it was too late to pull back. The audio was clipped and shared. Then came the video stills. Sadie's face, mid-turn. The sound of her crayon dropping. I didn't post it. I didn't have to. People saw what they needed to. And then, they decided. Some called me brave. Some called me a liar. Some said I should've handled it privately. Some said I'd finally stood up. And in the middle of all that static, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in days. "Natalie, can I come over?" Natalie stood at my door, holding a sketchbook. She didn't say hi. She just handed it to me. Sadie's drawings. One page. Our Subaru parked outside the lake house. Another. Sadie, tiny, under a gray cloud. Everyone else in the drawing had no mouths. Natalie's hands trembled. I thought she was just energetic, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. Brent said she screamed at everyone, that she broke things. I shook my head. She sings. She colors. She tries. Natalie sat on the edge of my couch like it wasn't real furniture, her voice cracked. I loved him. But I didn't love that version of him. She stared at the sketchbook again. Now I wonder how many versions I've been told to love. We didn't hug. It didn't feel like a hugging moment. But she left her wedding ring on the table when she walked out. Later that week, Grandma Martha called. Not a text. A real phone call. You and the little one doing all right? Her voice still held the rust of northern Michigan winters. We're getting there. Good. I'm in Traverse City. Come up for pie. It wasn't a suggestion. Sadie was quiet the whole ride. Only spoke when we passed a wooden boat dock. That one looks like the one from before the bad day, she said. Martha greeted us at her front door with 2 mugs of cider and eyes sharp as ever. She looked at Sadie like she was counting every freckle. She's got your stubborn chin, she said, handing me a slice of cherry pie. Then she added, and your mother's silence. But that doesn't have to stay. Martha poured herself a splash of bourbon and opened a drawer I didn't even remember being there. Inside, a thick manila envelope, labeled in blocky handwriting. Property Torch Lake? She slid it across the table. Full ownership. Notarized. Updated this morning. I blinked. Martha, I don't. She needs a different memory of that place, she interrupted. Sadie, curled up on the couch nearby, hummed softly. Not the cartoon song. Something new. Martha looked at me then, and for the first time in years I didn't see judgment or comparison. Just clarity. She'll remember what you did next. Not just what they did before. We drove back to Ann Arbor that night, stars trailing us like loose threads. The lakehouse was ours now. But peace never comes without a cost. 2 days later, Natalie filed for legal separation. The same afternoon, my phone lit up again. No contact photo, just a message. From Brent. You think this is over? I didn't reply. But I started packing a bag. Because I knew what came next. Have you ever been punished? For telling the truth everyone else ignored? Comment your story. I'll read every one. The wind caught her voice again. Sadie was standing barefoot on the back porch, arms outstretched, singing softly to the sky. The same song from that cartoon she used to watch over and over. The one Brent said was too loud. Too much. Same melody. Same verse. But this time, she didn't cry. I stood in the doorway, one hand on my coffee mug, the other pressed to my heart like it needed a reminder. It had been 6 months since the lake house. 6 months since she asked me if she was bad. Now, her voice floated like it belonged here. Like it had always belonged. The porch creaked gently beneath her little feet. A butterfly landed on the edge of the railing. She didn't stop singing. Didn't pause to see if anyone told her to hush. She didn't need permission. Not anymore. Behind me, Tara's laughter floated from the kitchen. Low and warm, like the scent of vanilla and cinnamon she was whipping into cupcakes. Grandma Martha sat out in the yard under a wide straw hat, flipping through the Sunday paper like it was 1983. She looked up and smiled when Sadie hit the high note. No flinch, no correction, just pride. Our home in Traverse City wasn't big, but it was ours. A single-story ranch with chipped shutters and a yard that needed love. We painted the hallway seafoam green last month. Sadie picked it. Said it felt like breathing. Sadie's song drifted into humming as she skipped across the yard. Her arms swayed in time with the wind, that cartoon melody still dancing on her lips. A knock came at the side gate. It was Mrs. Ferris from next door, holding a potted violet wrapped in tissue paper. "Happy birthday to the singing girl," she said with a wink. Sadie lit up. She ran to accept the plant, hugged Mrs. Ferris's knees, and whispered, "Thank you for coming." I wouldn't miss it. The older woman replied, then turned to me. She's always humming out here. It's lovely. Brings the birds closer. I smiled. She's just finally got her voice back. Mrs. Ferris nodded gently. No questions asked. Inside, Tara was lining cupcakes along the kitchen counter, each one topped with a swirl of purple icing and a single edible daisy. 7, she said, counting. She's officially big. She always was, I said. We didn't plan a big party. No bouncy houses or elaborate themes. Just 3 neighbors, 2 close friends, and Martha. And yet the air felt full. Full of something we hadn't had in a long time. Peace. Sadie sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket, unwrapping markers and sketchbooks from brown papered gifts. One card had glitter glued into a crooked heart. Another was handmade, pressed flowers taped to a folded sheet. It had no name on it, just a line inside in slanted handwriting. You're brave, and your mama is too. And Tara read it over my shoulder. No return address? She asked. I shook my head. Just an envelope with no stamp. We both knew who it was from. And we both let it be. After the last guest had left, and Sadie curled up on the couch in her new butterfly print pajamas, I stepped into the back room. The one we called the quiet room, where I kept letters I hadn't read twice, and memories I hadn't figured out where to place yet. On the shelf sat a thick manila envelope, postmarked February. I had opened it once. I opened it again. Inside was the final court notice, stamped, signed, enforced, no contact, permanent, for the safety of the child. Brent was legally banned from approaching Sadie, from calling her, from attending school functions, from even writing a letter addressed in her name. I remember when it arrived. I didn't cry. Instead, I poured a cup of chamomile tea, sat on the floor, and let the weight settle. Not in panic, not in sorrow, but in finality. Sometimes safety doesn't come with sirens. It arrives in silence. Elaine never responded to the letter I sent her that same week. No apology. No acknowledgement. But I didn't need her to anymore. I used to think peace would feel like a loud vindication. A courtroom slam. A front-page headline. Turns out, it feels like Sadie falling asleep with her mouth slightly open, arms wrapped around a new stuffed bear, and no bruise on her cheek. It feels like being able to exhale fully, without checking the locks. It feels like hearing a child sing, and realizing no one in the room wants her to stop. It was nearly dusk when I found the old box. I had been cleaning out the hallway closet, just wiping shelves, reorganizing holiday lights, when I saw it wedged behind a dusty stack of blankets. A weathered cardboard shoebox, held shut with a single ribbon. Inside were Sadie's drawings from last summer. Some were smeared with melted crayon, others folded like secret letters. One caught my breath. A figure, tall, broad-shouldered, stood drawn in marker near a dock. Another, smaller figure with curly hair and bright circles for eyes, stood beside him. And then, a single red X ran across the tall figure's face, slashed in with angry, jagged strokes. The words above the image, scrawled in Sadie's handwriting. Not nice. I sat on the floor, the paper resting in my lap, and for a moment, just one, I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me. Then I picked up a pencil. Beside the small figure I added another. This one had shorter hair, a soft smile. No hands raised in anger, just one hand reaching gently to hold the smaller figures. No captions. No names. Just connection. I slipped the paper back in the box, not to forget, but to mark the difference between what was and what we chose instead. Sadie never saw me add to the drawing. And she didn't need to. Some truths are passed down not in words, but in what we no longer allow. The next morning, Sadie woke before I did. I heard her feet padding softly down the hallway, the sound of a child who no longer feared waking the world. She tiptoed into the kitchen, still wearing her butterfly pajamas, and opened the back door without asking. I followed her out a few minutes later, wrapping a sweater around my shoulders. The dew was still clinging to the blades of grass. The wooden fence caught the morning light like it was made of gold. And there she was, standing in the backyard, twirling slowly, singing. It was the same song, the same cartoon melody, the one about friendship and home and belonging, the one she had sung that morning at the lake house right before. I closed my eyes, but when I opened them again, I saw her. Not the memory. Sadie. Her shoulders relaxed, her eyes bright, her voice clear. And this time, she wasn't crying. She was smiling. Her arms spread like wings as she spun in slow, wobbly circles. Off key and off tempo, absolutely free. A neighbor was watering her garden next door. She looked over and waved. "Your daughter's got music in her," she said. I smiled. "Yes," I replied. "She does." No explanation, no apology, no history needed, just this moment. Later that day, after the candles were blown and the icing was licked from fingers, after Tara packed up her baking trays and Grandma Martha fell asleep in the sunroom, I sat on the porch swing with Sadie in my lap. She leaned her head against my chest. I could feel her humming again. This time, without any melody, just a soft vibration, like contentment had a frequency. And then she said, "Mommy." "Yes, baby? I like this house better than the other one." I kissed the top of her head. "Me too," I whispered. She tilted her face up toward mine. "Will we stay here forever?" I paused. Not because I didn't know, but because, for the first time in a long time, forever didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like a choice. "Yes," I said. "We will." That night I tucked her in gently and lingered by her door. She had one foot kicked outside the blanket, one arm curled beneath her cheek. And she was still humming. Before I turned away, I whispered something into the dark. We're rewriting the story now. The old one, the one with the slap, the silence, the shame, was no longer ours to carry. This new story had singing, and light, and room to breathe. That evening, as Sadie hummed to the wind and the sun dipped behind our fence, I finally felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Peace that didn't come from silence, but from choosing to speak. Not loud, not vengeful, just honest. There's a lie we're taught too early, that family is always safe. But sometimes, love doesn't come from who raised you. It comes from who protects you, who listens when others silence, who sees your hurt and says, "This matters." Protecting our children doesn't mean covering our family's sins. It means breaking the cycle, even if we break hearts in the process. And healing, it rarely looks like triumph. It looks like a small voice singing again, without fear of being told it's too much. If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, or something you've kept quiet for too long, you can share your truth here. There's room for it. And if you're still carrying a silence someone handed you, I hope you'll lay it down. Right here. We're listening.